get out. You don't belong here," the hostess snapped. Her lips curled in disgust. Her eyes darted over his tattered coat, the worn sneakers, the frayed backpack slung over one shoulder. The man, in his early 30s, lowered his eyes as conversations at nearby tables hushed. A moment ago, no one had noticed him. Now, every gaze was cutting, condescending. "I'm just here to eat," he began softly, but the manager had already stepped in, rushing past a waiter to stand beside the hostess. "Sir, you're disturbing the ambiance of our establishment. We cater to a certain clientele," the manager said, with a smug tilt of his chin. He wore a custom-made navy suit and a tie knotted so tight it seemed to strangle the last shred of empathy in him. "Do you have a reservation?" the hostess added, her tone ice cold. "No, I didn't know I needed one," the man answered. His voice was calm, but his eyes were full of quiet storm. The manager scoffed. "Of course you don't. Please leave before we call security. People were watching now." A woman in pearls whispered something to her husband. A group of young professionals at the bar laughed quietly. And still, the man stood there, unmoving, face unreadable. "I see," he muttered. "Thank you for showing me what kind of place this is." He turned, walking past the velvet ropes and out the polished glass doors. The cold wind of Manhattan night air hit him, but it didn't sting half as much as the humiliation burning under his skin. 1 year later, the same restaurant, same velvet ropes, same glossy black sign that read Maison de Minuit, etched in gold cursive. But tonight, something was different. A buzz floated in the air. Staff were in a frenzy fixing champagne flutes, aligning silverware, double-checking reservation lists. The manager barked orders like a general before war. "Everyone, tonight is everything," he barked. "The new owner's arriving any minute. I want perfection. No screw-ups, no surprises." The hostess, yes, the same one, adjusted her tight bun and touched up her lipstick in the polished mirror behind the reception. "Do we know who he is?" The buyer, anonymous, paid in full, bought the entire property outright, even kept the name. The manager looked both impressed and slightly terrified. The doors opened with a slow, deliberate push. Silence fell. A tall figure entered, dressed in a tailored black overcoat, sleek leather shoes, and a navy blue suit beneath. He removed his coat and handed it to the valet. As he stepped into the main foyer, his eyes scanned the place like he had once memorized every corner of it. The hostess approached, clipboard in hand, ready to greet. "Welcome to Maison de," she froze. Her lips parted, recognition flooding her features. Her voice faltered. You remember me." His voice was calm, but this time it carried weight, power. The manager appeared beside her, confusion on his face. "Sir, may I help?" The man didn't wait. He reached into his inside pocket, pulled out a folded document, and handed it to the manager. "My name is Elijah Martin. I'm the new owner." The manager went pale. The hostess gasped audibly. Behind them, the head chef peeked through the kitchen doors, curious. Conversations in the dining area died down again, just like they had 1 year ago. "I didn't recognize you," the hostess stammered. Elijah smiled. "It wasn't warm. You didn't look past my clothes. But that night I was worth more than this place. I just wanted to eat, Mr. Martin," the manager began, but Elijah raised a hand. "Save it. You judged me for looking too poor. Now, I own every inch of this restaurant, every fork, every chandelier, every paycheck. And tonight, I'm making some changes. Please, we didn't mean you did. You meant every word." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "Now, I suggest you gather the staff. We're having a team meeting, effective immediately." And with that, Elijah Martin walked past them straight into the dining room where he once stood, shamed. Now, he stood tall, applauded. As Elijah strode through the dining room, heads turned. Conversations faltered into murmurs. An elderly couple whispered behind their napkins. A Wall Street executive's jaw dropped mid-bite. A waiter, frozen mid-step, nearly spilled a tray of martinis. Elijah walked with purpose to the very table he had been denied a year ago, table 7. Corner booth, by the window overlooking Fifth Avenue. He took a seat like he had owned the chair all along, and now he did. Moments later, the manager appeared, staff trailing awkwardly behind him. The hostess stood furthest back, chewing the inside of her cheek. "Mr. Martin, the team is ready," the manager said, his voice thin. Elijah didn't rise. He looked at them as a king might study his court. "Let's begin." "Then," he said, folding his hands neatly in front of him, "this restaurant humiliated me. You didn't just refuse me service, you refused me dignity. You made me feel small in a place that's supposed to serve people food, not judge their worth by the fabric of their coat." No one spoke. Even the bartender stood quietly now, drying a glass he'd already cleaned. "I know who each of you are. Hostess, Clara Summers. Manager, Philip Wright. Head chef, Danielle, excellent risotto. By the way, but the culture here," he leaned in, "toxic." Clara shifted uncomfortably. Philip flushed. "So here's what's happening. This restaurant will now fund a foundation. 20% of all profits go directly to support youth coming from foster care, just like I did. I was homeless for 2 years after I aged out of the system. I know what it's like to be looked at like garbage. Not anymore." He looked directly at Clara. "Every employee will now undergo empathy training. You, Clara, will attend every hour. If you fail, you're fired." She opened her mouth, but Elijah held up a hand. "No, you're not here to talk. You're here to listen." Philip tried to recover his professional mask. "Mr. Martin, if I may, this is a high-end establishment. Changes like these could hurt our image." Elijah stood, slowly. "You're worried about image," he said, voice rising. "Do you know what I looked like that night? I hadn't slept in 2 days. I had just closed a deal worth 6 figures. I came here to celebrate quietly. But your image said I wasn't good enough." His voice dropped. "I built my first tech company in a shelter. You judged me for the laptop bag and didn't know it held the future of mobile AI. ABEAT of silence." Then another voice spoke. It was Danielle, the head chef. "Sir, may I say something?" Elijah turned. "Of course." She stepped forward, apron stained with flour, knife holster still around her waist. Her eyes were tired but honest. "I remember that night. I saw what they did. I wanted to say something but didn't. I'm sorry." Elijah studied her. For the first time, he nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate that." She bowed her head. "Welcome home, Mr. Martin." He smiled softly. "Call me Elijah." In the weeks that followed, Maison de Minuit underwent a transformation that no one saw coming. The story went viral after a customer live streamed Elijah's return. Headlines screamed, "Homeless tech genius buys the restaurant that rejected him," judged by appearance. He came back as a millionaire owner. Blogs wrote think pieces. TV shows begged for interviews. But Elijah remained quiet, letting his actions speak louder than headlines. He changed the menu, adding a $5 meal called the Resilience Special. Anyone struggling financially could ask for it without shame. No questions asked. Clara stayed, enduring every training module. Her pride scraped raw. She began to notice things she never had before, how customers flinched at her tone, how many people she had dismissed with a fake smile. One afternoon, Elijah found her crying in the back office. "You okay?" She wiped her eyes. "I didn't realize how cold I was. I thought I was just being professional." "You were being programmed," he said gently. "But you're not a robot." She looked up at him. "Why didn't you fire me?" Elijah sat across from her. "Because no one learns from being discarded. I wasn't asking for revenge. I wanted change." "I was horrible to you," she whispered. "Yeah," Elijah said, smiling, "but you're still here. That says something." That night, she greeted every customer like they were royalty, even the ones in hoodies, especially them. Elijah's own past came back to him in quiet moments. The soup kitchen, where he met a man who gave him his first tablet. The subway, where he sketched his first algorithm. The night he sold his first app for $50.0 but had nowhere to sleep. Now, he had penthouses, but he slept best in the old flannel shirt he wore when he had nothing. It reminded him who he was. One rainy night, a teenage boy in drenched clothes wandered into the restaurant. "Hey, kid," Clara called. "Come in and sit. You hungry?" The boy hesitated. I don't have money." Elijah stood near the bar. He heard it. He walked over. "Then you're our guest," he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Clara. Resilience special. On the house," she grinned, coming right up. The boy's hands trembled as he took a seat. "Why are you being nice?" Elijah knelt to his level. "Because someone should have been nice to me, too." A year passed. The restaurant thrived not just in profits, but in soul. Customers came not for the steak, but for the story. Elijah's story. The restaurant that once shamed him became a beacon of redemption. At a charity gala he hosted in the same space, Elijah stood at the microphone, tux crisp, voice steady. "They kicked me out for looking too poor," he began. "But that moment didn't break me. It built me. Because pain is a teacher. Humiliation is fuel. And now, this place, once a temple of vanity, is a sanctuary for dignity." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But Elijah's eyes drifted to the back of the room. A man stood there unshaven, jeans stained, eyes hollow with hunger. He smiled. "Someone get that gentleman a seat," Elijah said into the mic. "And tell the kitchen make it special." The man at the back of the gala hesitated as servers rushed to offer him a seat. He looked around, overwhelmed by the chandeliers, the glittering guests, and the tuxedo-clad staff. He looked down at himself, mud-caked boots, jacket 2 sizes too big, and fingers trembling from the cold. He started to back away. Elijah stepped down from the stage. "Wait," he called, walking past guests in gowns and tailored suits, ignoring the whispers. He reached the man and offered his hand. "What's your name?" Devin." The man stuttered. "I shouldn't be here." "You should," Elijah said firmly. "This place was made for people like you." Devin looked confused. "People like me. People who've been turned away." Elijah smiled. "Come on." I saved a seat next to me. Devin followed. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Elijah noticed, paused, then turned back to the mic. "For those of you frowning right now," he said into the mic, voice calm but sharp, "remember where I came from. If this bothers you, maybe you're not supposed to be here." A few people quietly excused themselves. Most stayed. One woman stood and clapped slowly. Then another. A standing ovation rose not for Elijah's wealth, but for his truth. Later that night, when the gala ended, Devin approached him in private. "You don't know what this meant," he said, voice hoarse. "I've been sleeping behind dumpsters. Tonight's the first time I felt like a person." Elijah placed a business card in Devin's hand. "Call this number tomorrow. We'll set you up with housing, clothes, and work training. But tonight, get some rest. You've earned it." Devin broke down in tears. Elijah didn't look away. 3 months later, Devin was working as a server at the restaurant. He shaved, cut his hair, stood straighter. He greeted guests with warmth, not rehearsed politeness, but the kind born of surviving pain and choosing kindness anyway. Elijah watched him from afar one night, pride swelling in his chest. Clara stood beside him. "He reminds me of you," she said softly. Elijah chuckled. "I see it too. I'm glad you didn't give up on me," she added, eyes shining. "I never give up on people, just on places that forget they're built by people." But not everyone celebrated his return. One afternoon, a man in a gray suit entered the restaurant and requested Elijah. He claimed to be from a luxury hospitality group. "I'm here with an offer," the man said, sliding a document across Elijah's desk in the upstairs office. "We'd like to purchase the restaurant from you. Triple your investment. Clean rebranding. Full buyout." Elijah didn't even touch the paper. "Because now it's profitable. Because it's high profile," the man said. "But we feel the image is too charitable, not refined. We'd elevate it." Elijah leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. How many people have you fed who couldn't afford a meal?" The man blinked. "That's not really our business model." "Exactly," Elijah said, sliding the offer back. and that's why you'll never own this place. He stood, opened the door. Thanks for coming. The man left, baffled. Elijah continued to grow the business, launching sister locations in Chicago, Atlanta, and even one in London, each based on the same values. He made Clara general manager. Devin became head of staff training. The media called it hospitality revolution. But for Elijah, it was never about headlines. It was about redemption. One night, as he walked past table 7, the infamous corner booth, he saw a mother and her teenage daughter eating in silence. Their clothes were modest. The daughter looked around nervously, clearly out of place. He approached gently. Everything okay? The mother looked startled, then smiled. Yes, sir. It's just my daughter's first time in a restaurant like this. She was worried we'd be asked to leave. Elijah knelt beside the girl. Do you know what this table means? She shook her head. He smiled. It's where I once stood, cold, tired, hungry. They told me I didn't belong. Now, I sit here whenever I want. And so can you. You belong anywhere you choose to. The girl's eyes widened. Her mother gripped Elijah's hand. Thank you, she whispered. He patted her shoulder. You're welcome. Enjoy everything. But even for Elijah, some nights were hard. Nights when he'd wake up in his penthouse and still feel the chill of a subway floor. Nights when he'd dream of the shelter where he built his first app. Then wake up missing the creaky bunk bed that had become his sanctuary. He started visiting shelters again, not as a CEO, but as a volunteer. He didn't announce who he was. He served soup, handed out blankets, and listened. One night, a kid no older than 14 looked up at him and asked, Why are you here? You don't belong here. Elijah smiled. This is exactly where I belong. 2 years after buying the restaurant, Elijah was honored by the city for exemplary contributions to human dignity and social entrepreneurship. The mayor called him a living example of resilience. At the ceremony, Elijah stood at the podium, eyes scanning the crowd. Clara sat in the front row, smiling with quiet pride. Devin was next to her, wiping tears. The teenage girl from the restaurant was there too, holding a small bouquet. He spotted even the old manager, Philip, in the back, no longer working at Maison, but there nonetheless. Elijah took a breath. When I was kicked out of Maison de Minuit, he began. It hurt. It cut deeper than most insults because it wasn't loud, it was quiet, polite, professional. But it told me, you're not enough. He paused. But that moment gave me fire. I didn't buy this place to flex. I bought it to flip the story. Another pause. I want you to remember this. How you treat people when you think they have nothing. That's who you really are. Not your title, not your car, not your bank account. He raised the plaque he'd been given. This is nice, he said, holding it up. But the real reward is seeing people walk into my restaurant and not worry if they're too poor, because there's no such thing. The room stood in ovation. That night back at the restaurant, the lights dimmed. Soft jazz played. Elijah sat alone at table 7, sipping water, watching the staff work like clockwork. Clara approached with a smile. You did it. He looked around, eyes glassy. No, we did. She pulled a folded photo from her pocket and placed it on the table. It was a screenshot grainy of Elijah standing at the front entrance. A year ago, in his old coat, face downcast. I found this on the old security feed, she said. I thought you should have it. Elijah stared at the photo. So much pain in that moment, so much silence, now replaced with warmth, sound, life. Frame it, he said quietly. Hang it near the door. She blinked. Are you sure? He nodded. Let it remind us and every guest that no one's value can be measured by clothes, or money, or anything you can see. She smiled and left. Elijah leaned back, eyes drifting upward. He didn't need applause or headlines. He just needed to know that somewhere, tonight, someone who once felt invisible now felt seen, and that would always be enough. A week later, Elijah sat in a small recording studio tucked between 2 old bookstores in Brooklyn. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam. A dusty microphone dangled in front of him, and a red light blinked on as the producer gave him a thumbs up. Go ahead, Elijah. We're rolling. He leaned forward, cleared his throat, and began. When I was 17, I slept in a train station with a cracked phone and a dream no one believed in. The thing that hurt most wasn't the hunger or the cold, it was how people looked at me, like I didn't matter. His voice softened. That night at Maison de Minuit, when they kicked me out for looking poor, it wasn't the first time someone wrote me off, but it was the last time I let it break me. He paused, then smiled into the mic. This podcast is called You Belong. It's for everyone who's ever been made to feel invisible. I see you. You matter. The first episode went viral in under 48 hours. Listeners sent in their own stories of being turned away, judged, underestimated. A janitor who built a nonprofit in his garage. A single mom who coded her way out of poverty. A young artist who was told his accent was too ghetto for galleries, then opened his own. Elijah read each one. He replied to all of them. Clara, now the head of operations for all Maison locations, joined Elijah on several episodes. Devin led second chance training sessions for other restaurants, hotels, and retail spaces across the country. Even the old manager, Philip, now worked for Elijah's foundation as a silent ambassador, teaching young professionals how to unlearn elitism. Maison de Minuit became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol, a movement. Universities studied its business model. High school teachers played Elijah's podcast in class. Ted invited him to speak. He walked on stage to a standing ovation, paused in his usual calm, collected way, and said only, "They kicked me out because I looked poor. Then I bought the place. Now I'm helping others build their own." One winter night, Elijah was walking home from a late shift. He liked walking even now, despite the cars and security detail offered to him. Snow fell gently on his shoulders. He passed a boy curled up on a bench. Shivering, he stopped. "Hey," Elijah said softly. "You okay?" The boy flinched. "Don't call the cops. I'm not." Elijah took off his coat and draped it around the boy. "You hungry?" The boy nodded slowly. "Come with me," Elijah said, holding out his hand. The boy stared at him, then took it. They walked to a nearby Maison location, one of the new ones, built inside a repurposed library. Warm lights, soft music, and the smell of fresh baked bread wrapped around them. Staff didn't blink. They knew. Elijah sat the boy down, ordered him a meal, and sat across from him. "You got a name, Jace," the boy whispered. "Well, Jace, you belong here." The boy's eyes brimmed with disbelief. Elijah smiled. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a familiar card, the same kind he once gave Devin. "Call this tomorrow. We'll help." The boy gripped the card like it was a key to another universe. Years passed. Elijah aged with quiet grace. He never sought office, never craved fame. But the world kept coming to him. Schools, corporations, even governments asked, "How did you do it?" He always answered the same. "I remembered how it felt to be locked out. And then I built a door." Maison expanded into 15 cities. Elijah built a startup incubator inside one, a training kitchen in another, a shelter disguised as a boutique hotel in a third. At a ribbon cutting in Detroit, an old woman came up to him and pressed a worn $10 bill into his hand. "It's all I got," she said, "but I want to invest in whatever you're building." Elijah teared up. "MAAM. You just made the biggest investment of all." He never forgot Table 7, even as the world changed. Even as newspapers dubbed him the kindness tycoon. Even as billionaires tried to buy him out. He would return to that corner table, sit quietly, sip water, and remember the boy with the tattered coat and the heart full of fight. He kept that grainy photo Clara gave him hanging by the door. Guests often stopped to look at it. Some just nodded, some cried, some whispered, "Thank you." And some, just a few, recognized the same pain in themselves and stayed for something more than food. They stayed for hope. And Elijah Martin, once homeless, once humiliated, gave it freely. With every plate, every podcast, and every person who walked through his open door, because to him, they were never too poor. They were just too powerful to be seen yet, until now.